Merry Christmas and welcome to Renewing Your Mind.
What Isaiah is saying here about this king who is to come is that he will be a counselor par excellence. He will be a counselor whose wisdom will amaze and astonish.
After much anticipation, Christmas Day is here, and God's people longed for that first Christmas, the coming of the Messiah, the one who throughout the Old Testament was prophesied to come and bring salvation. This is the Christmas Day edition of Renewing Your Mind. I'm Nathan W. Bingham, and again, Merry Christmas, and thank you for joining us today. This week, we are working through R.C. Sproul's series, Coming of the Messiah. It's an amazing journey through a number of Old Testament prophecies regarding our Savior, the promised Messiah. You can own this series, along with a copy of the Christmas devotional, The Advent of Glory, when you give a year-end donation at renewingyourmind.org. This offer does end tomorrow, so don't delay. Well, today we'll learn that the success of our King isn't based on a piece of land or anything else in creation, but on the King himself. Here's Dr. Sproul.
We continue now by looking once more at another Old Testament prophecy that centuries before the birth of Christ looked down the corridors of time and announced his future advent. This passage that we're going to look at today is one that is frequently found on Christmas cards and as the subject of many Christmas sermons. It's found in the book of the prophet Isaiah in chapter 9, beginning in verse 6. Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6 reads as follows, "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And of the increase of his government and peace there will be no end. And upon the throne of David and over his kingdom, to order it and establish it with judgment and justice, from that time forward, even forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this." Now, this text that is so rich and familiar to us because of its frequent reference in the Christmas season announces the birth of a baby. And this baby is identified in the context of the prophecy of Isaiah as the birth of a king. I mean, that's what we have to see, first of all, that the basic identity of the person who is being prophesied and described in this text is one who is born to be a king. And not just any kind of king, but a king who will follow in the line of King David. We remember that in ancient Israel, the golden age of Israel was ushered in through the monarchy of her second king, King David. And sometimes we forget what a tiny little country about the state of Rhode Island, Palestine, was and is in the ancient world. I'm going to draw a picture of a sort of semicircle here on my blackboard that you can't see, but you can hear as I scratch on it, and you can try to imagine it in your eyes, sort of a horseshoe-looking figure. And this represents what is called the boundaries of the Fertile Crescent. And you recall that on the upper side of this, or the north portion of it, lie two continents, the continent of Europe and the continent of Asia. And inside my little horseshoe is the Mediterranean Sea. And then to the south side of the horseshoe is the continent of Africa. Now, if we go to the right end portion, the closed portion of our horseshoe, or to the eastern edge of it, we see a little ribbon of real estate. Further to the east of that is arid desert. Now, this tiny little ribbon of real estate formed a land bridge that connected 3 continents. And in the ancient world, whoever controlled this little land bridge controlled the commerce of the time, because the caravans that did the business transactions in antiquity would travel from Asia and Europe down into Africa and back again. And so the geopolitical significance of this tiny ribbon of real estate called Palestine, or in biblical terms, Israel, was a piece of real estate that was enormously coveted by the world powers. Now, during the reign of David, as I said, the golden age of Israel was ushered in, because under his reign, this tiny little nation became the mouse that roared. It became a leading world power as David extended the boundaries of Israel from Dan to Beersheba. And David established a military power that terrified all of the surrounding nations. And David distinguished himself as a great statesman and political administrator. He introduced one of the most prosperous periods of economy in the nation's history. He also, as we know, was a poet, a musician, and a man after God's own heart. Then, on the death of David, much of his gains were consolidated by his son Solomon. But under Solomon's rule, this gold began to tarnish a little bit when Solomon committed the atrocious sin of introducing the corvée, which was a slave labor force taken from his own people. And so the statesmanship of his father began to crumble under this oppressive dimension of his regime. And upon his death, the gold turned to rust, and the kingdom was divided with the sons Rehoboam and Jeroboam. And the future history of the divided kingdom reads in part like a rogues gallery of wicked monarchs. And so the people long for a return to the golden age, when somehow the glory that was Israel would be revived, when one would come like David. The prophet Amos made the prophecy that in the work of the Messiah, the fallen booth of David would be established again, or would be set right. If you can see this little booth or throne tilted over on its side with the wild vegetation covering it over as it was decaying and rotting and mildewing and so on, the kingdom was in shambles. And yet God promised that a day would come when a king like David would reign once more. Now, much of the messianic prophecy of the Old Testament focused on this king who would come, the shepherd king who would come and rule like David. And here in the passage of Isaiah, we hear the announcement of the birth of that promised king. For unto us a child is born. Unto us a son is given. Notice that this is not simply the joyful announcement of a particular set of parents, where the husband and the wife or the father and the mother are celebrating the announcement of the impending birth of their baby. But this is a child that is to be born for the nation. Unto us a son is born. Unto us a child is to be given. And then we read, the government will be upon his shoulder. This immediately identifies in the text that this is prophetic with respect to the birth of a king, one upon whose shoulders will be born the government of the nation. Can't help but think of the ancient image in mythology in the non-Hebrew world of the portrait of Atlas, hunched over, bearing the world on his shoulders. Because to be a king, to reign over any nation, not to mention to reign over all nations, is to assume an enormous burden upon one's back, or upon one's shoulder. But the image here is of the king who will be born to the people, who will carry the nation on his shoulders. Now, then the writer turns his attention to describe some of the qualifications and the character of this king. And his name will be called, now in my translation, it reads like this: Wonderful, comma, Counselor, comma, Mighty God, comma, Everlasting Father, comma, Prince of Peace. Now, one of the difficulties we have in translation is the problem of affixing punctuation, because the original text didn't have punctuation. And so these commas that we find in the various printed texts of the Bible represent usually an editorial decision among translators on how to break up the structure of the sentences that are there. I personally think there's a misplaced comma here. And by saying this, I run the risk of exciting everybody's wrath who loves the song, His Name is Wonderful, because that song is based on this comma, where we take one of the aspects of the Messiah who is to come and we celebrate his glory by saying, His name is wonderful. Well, his name is, of course, wonderful, and we have no quarrel with that. But I think that what Isaiah is talking about here is not simply that his name will be called Wonderful, but it will be Wonderful Counselor. And that which is wonderful is not just something that is nice or something that is pleasant or desirable, but in the original meaning of the term wonderful, the word meant full of wonder, astonishing, amazing, something that evokes awe in those who watch the performance. And what Isaiah is saying here about this king who is to come is that he will be a counselor par excellence. He will be a counselor whose wisdom will amaze and astonish. And it's also interesting here that this one who is coming to fulfill the function as king is described as this awe-inspiring, filled with wonder, purposeful counselor, because the term that is used for counselor is the term that was usually used in Old Testament times to describe not the king, but the person who held the highest position of counsel to the king. That is, the king's most trusted advisor. But in this sense, we have the king himself not needing the trusted advisor to teach him how to rule in justice and in wisdom, because wisdom is in himself in full measure. Now, very indirectly, this suggestion of the coming Messianic king to be one who is a wonderful counselor suggests, as I said, in a very distant way, a fulfillment of another strand of Messianic expectancy in the Old Testament, wherein the Messiah will ultimately be called the wisdom of God. We remember in the 8th chapter of Proverbs the celebration of the wisdom of God that is with God from the beginning and comes from his presence, and wisdom is personified as if he were a real person. And in the New Testament, that personification of wisdom goes beyond the boundaries of normal Hebrew poetry to speak about a real, concrete incarnation of divine wisdom when the Word is made flesh. And so this king is going to be a king who incorporates the fullness of wisdom. Now, if you lived in Israel for very long after the kingdom was divided, you began to hunger and thirst for a king who showed even a modicum of wisdom. The history of the monarchy in a divided kingdom may be described as the history of foolishness. But this king who will come after the likeness of David will be a wonderful counselor. Well, what else is said about the Messianic shepherd king who is to come? He will be called Mighty God. Now, there is an allusion here in the language that is used with respect to the mightiness, not simply to God's omnipotence in general or in the abstract. But here we have another image that is frequently used with respect to God in the Old Testament, and this image is now transferred to the Messiah. That the mighty God relates to one who is invincible in warfare. Now keep in mind that David distinguished himself as a warrior of the highest degree before he ascended to the throne of Israel. He was Israel's mighty warrior. Saul has slain his thousands, David his tens of thousands. And so this king, who will be like David, will be a mighty warrior God, a God who will fight triumphantly for his people. He will be a conquering king. Now you begin to see why so many of the people in the time of Jesus had their eyes focused exclusively on a Messiah who would be a political revolutionary, who would drive the hated Romans out of the land, because of this fierce sense of expectation among the people of the political deliverer who would come. But the battle that Christ wins in his reign transcends the struggles that take place on this planet in ordinary combat or warfare, because his victory is a victory over the cosmic forces. This mighty God King is the one who leads captivity captive and conquers the most fierce enemies of the people, the enemies of Satan, of hell, and of death itself. Well, it goes on to say that he will be called the everlasting Father and the Prince of Peace. The everlasting Father is a strange title to give to a king. We don't think of a king as a father, and yet the character of God in his reign over his people is expressed in this image, particularly in the New Testament, of fatherhood. That the king is not to rule over his subjects in order to oppress them, to tyrannize them, or to exploit them for his own purposes. But the king in Israel, when the monarchy was first established, was supposed to be God's substitute for the nation. He was to rule over the nation as a father rules over the house, displaying the love of God as well as the administration of God, the care and nurture of God for his family. And as a father pitieth his children, so God pities those who are humble before him. And so this king will not be a king who is a politician concerned only about his own prosperity, but he's a king who will be a father to the people. And of course, the adjectival descriptive term here of the Father is everlasting. The new David, the new king, will have a kingdom that will not rust, will not decay, will not fall away, but will reign forever and ever. And isn't it strange that we have the connection here in this description of this king who will be born is one who not only is a mighty warrior of God, but he is the Prince of Peace. Because the purpose of his warfare is to end warfare, to end conflict, and to bring the peace of the nations, the healing of the nations, and above all, peace with God. All of these things are wrapped up in one who is to come, and his reign shall be forever. In this Christmas season, take some time to think about politics. It's hard not to think about politics since it's in the news every day. But where do you put your hope with respect to presidents and kings? What the New Testament tells us is that right now, the person who is the chief executive officer in the cosmos, the person who has ascended to the highest political position in the universe, is this child who was born, this son who was given to us. That right now we live in a government ruled by Christ. Now, I'm not talking about our national government or our local government, but all local governments in an ultimate sense are still under the dominion of Christ. But our supreme ruler right now is the one who has come and fulfilled in every aspect and every detail this description that was penned centuries ago by Isaiah.
The picture of the coming Messiah as a king gave the people a picture of his rule and reign. But even in that description, they failed to understand Jesus' glory, his holiness. And that's why we're featuring R.C. Sproul's series, Coming of the Messiah, this week on Renewing Your Mind. We also need to be reminded that Christ reigns as King. Although today's message is an important one on Christmas Day, it's something we as Christians should consider often. God is a promise keeper. He cannot lie. And the Old Testament is filled with prophecies that were fulfilled by Christ. This teaches us about the identity of Jesus, and it affirms the reliability of the Scriptures. We can trust God, and we can trust His Word. If you'd like to work through this series at your own pace, we'll give you lifetime digital access to all the messages when you give a year-end donation at renewingyourmind.org or by using the link in the podcast show notes. In addition to this series, we'll send you a copy of The Advent of Glory, a Christmas devotional based on R.C. Sproul's teaching. As Dr. Sproul has noted, the narrative of the birth of Jesus can become so familiar to many of us that the words just slip over us. So request a resource that can help you slow down and dwell on the wonder and meaning of Christmas. Request this resource bundle today when you donate at renewingyourmind.org. This offer ends tomorrow, so don't delay. I mentioned earlier this week that back in 2008, Ligonier Ministries released the album The Word Became Flesh. It's a musical interpretation and celebration of the Incarnation, and it's narrated by Dr. Sproul. You can stream it on Apple Music, Spotify, or wherever you listen to music. As it's Christmas Day, here's another preview. That was The Word Became Flesh, available to stream right now wherever you listen to music. Perhaps listen to it today as you gather with family and friends. So where would this king be born, the long-awaited Messiah? In a major city of great prominence? In Jerusalem? No. He was born in the small town of Bethlehem. That will be R.C. Sproul's focus as we conclude this series tomorrow, here on Renewing Your Mind.